terms of kind of the discussions we've been having internally for at least about 5-6 months, we've been trying to push forward this whole thinking of real value creation, right? And we believe that the reason a lot of the brands today aren't really sustainable or aren't doing good in the world is because they really only have one stakeholder that they care about, and that's the shareholders, right? This whole mindset that the business model is purely and ultimately only built to build shareholder value is kind of where the things kind of fall apart nowadays. If that's the only people that you care about, arguably then everything else falls apart longer term, right? So when we look, the Amazons and we look at the Ubers and look at that stuff, at the end of the day, the wealth or the benefits or the positive that they brought to the world was really to the shareholder. But everybody else, longer term, as it unraveled, as the true colors came out, you kind of realize that there was no real value creation outside of the shareholders, even if the narrative was. Yeah, exactly.
Like coming to your town, right?
Exactly.
How great it is, but all the money's going right out of your town, right?
Exactly, and that's what it's starting to look more and more like. And the CEO of Delivery Hero, and you touched on it a little bit earlier. I mean, last week or the week before, he said, he was boasting, and they were so proud that during COVID, we're taking care of restaurants, and now more than ever, we're simplifying and accelerating the speed at which restaurants can join our platform,
right.
and we're going to pay them back their own money at shorter intervals, twice a month instead of once a month. I don't remember what it was.
By the way, another insane thing, because they're actually using the cash flow. I mean, can you imagine how much cash they're sitting on? I mean, nobody thinks about that either. I mean, Deliveroo pay every 2 weeks, right? I mean, that's a lot of cash they're sitting on and they're making money from, right? I mean,
and they can play with that, right? And like a restaurant can't play with that, right? Because their terms with their suppliers are completely different, right? Exactly. So
some businesses operate just for that cash flow, right? I mean, they make their profit on that cash flow.
Absolutely. So what happened to we talked about this, Steve and I, a lot. When you're growing up and you're looking, and you're in school, you're in college, and you idolize people. You want to be like all these tech entrepreneurs. You want to work for maybe Delivery Hero if you're in Berlin. You want to work for Facebook. You want to work for Uber. You want to work, you want to work for these huge tech companies. But the underbelly of the beast, of all of these beasts, is starting to show, and that lack of empathy is kind of clear, right? Like they are only there for themselves and only for the value creation of their shareholders. Now, I feel like there is zero accountability. What is the role of consumers, but also what is the role of governments? We're seeing it in San Francisco, putting caps on commissions. We're seeing it in different parts of the world. We're seeing, things kind of change a little bit. We're seeing regulation in Dubai when it came to Uber and Careem and stuff in terms of pricing, in terms of stuff like that. How do we manage this world? How do we control them? How do we make sure that they actually do benefit and less harm that they're actually doing? And how do we make sure that people can see through the bullshit, especially the kids that are growing up? Guys like me, arguably, 5-10 years ago, I was idolizing these guys. And now I'm looking at them and saying, wow, I am super offended. I got fucked. I looked up this guy. It turns out he's kind of a monster. So how do we do this? Yeah, I drank the Kool-Aid for such a long time, and I benefited from that as well, right? So I'm not going to be kind of hypocritical about it too. Like I rode the wave, I helped create the brands, I drove the narrative, I sold the story to Steve when he joined Kareem. I sold him the Kool-Aid. So at the end of the day, what's the role of government? What's the role of consumers? And how can the guys who are growing up now kind of see the world differently? And
the first thing I'd say is that it's easy to demonize them, but they're clever, right? They're smart at what they're there's no doubt these are very smart people, very driven, right? And there's a lot at stake, right? And they've actually created something that consumers really want. So you can't fully fault everything that they're doing, right?
No,
the question is what's fair, right? And what works in this business. And so I'm a free market guy. I believe in free market. However, I also believe in antitrust, right?
Yeah.
And if you look at Delivery Hero, they're interesting because they've retreated to the markets that have less antitrust regulation. If you actually look at it, right? So you could, it makes perfect sense, right? But I don't think people are looking at it that way. They retracted from all the westernized, I'll call them westernized, more legislative markets where they knew, like the UK, where they knew they'd be blocked eventually, right? So that's a brilliant move. So as business people, I give them top marks, right? And they genuinely solved the problem, right? They solved the problem, with consumers want convenience, right? So they did that. But I think there's two things that they haven't solved. Employees need to be protected always, just because you're a gig economy worker. And I think there's ways to do that. I think there's lots of ways to do that, where you can be a gig economy worker but still protected. And you see that with the COVID-19. I mean, I loved, Uber, Dara saying, the government needs to bail out our people that we don't even consider employees, and we're not going to give benefits, but the government should be awful worried about them, right? But I mean, that takes huge balls. I mean, to do that. Like at first, I found it really offensive when I thought, wow, look at the balls on this guy, right? I mean, he said we're not going to take care of them because they're not our employees, but the government should, right? But it's exposed all the cracks of that. So I think employees need to be looked after, the same way they would be looked after in any other market. So governments need to catch up, right? The second thing is you look at legislation around, the antitrust, right? If consumers are suffering, then it needs to be looked into. I mean, these guys are being investigated around the world. Like in New York, I mean, what's part of one of New York's biggest tourism assets? It's the restaurant business.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, people go to New York just to eat, right? The beautiful restaurants, but they're being destroyed. So there's a legislative commission that's been set up to investigate, these practices. And I don't think that they need a check. The point isn't to make them go away. The point is to check them, because they're just going to keep moving and governments are going to be behind, right? So the government's got to catch up and get them under control. And if they can compete, then great. But it's going to force them to compete on a more fair basis, because right now they've jumped through loopholes that existed. They're very clever. But when that all comes back into play, the question is, what business model works then? Because your current business model doesn't work now, and your costs are going up.
But then arguably, if you have maturity in the government and in legislation and antitrust, then arguably operationally these businesses are going to be a bit more controlled, and hence the bottom impact on on consumers is higher prices, right?
Yeah, that's 100%.
Right. So inevitably, the only way to manage these guys is to kind of make things more expensive.
Well, it's already happening though, and it's actually amazing. Like in the U.S. today, I mean, we spend our summers in the States, and I paid $19 for a delivery once. I mean, like the cost of delivery is insane, right? Like the average delivery cost is about $7, right? $7 to $9, right? Can you imagine? Like the average lunch ticket is $11, right? So it's actually reached the point where consumers are going, like I'm not that price sensitive, but like when I get a $19 delivery charge, I'm like, WTF? I mean, I'm like, it's offensive, right? And it was, so I start, I think consumers are starting to wake up to that, and I think people are going to start going back to restaurants. Like I genuinely, because it doesn't make, like, when I saw that bill, I'm like, I will never do that again. I'll get in the car and drive 5 minutes and and get it, right? Not because it's the money, but because it's offensive to me, right? I'd rather give it to some guy on the street than, for that, right? So, I think people are going to start going back. And if you think about it, things like drive-throughs, I mean, the drive-through was the first delivery, right? Yeah. I mean, people, that was the beginning of delivery, and it's still very popular. I think people are going to start going back to restaurants. I was in London a little while ago before the pandemic, and I was in the city, and it was around noon. And I was shocked at the number of, first of all, I was surprised that there were hardly any delivery couriers around. I was right in the, the financial district. But and I wish I took a picture of it, 70% of the people had a bag in their hand. Because why would you order, and spend all that money when you could go downstairs and get a breath of fresh air?
Pick it up.
And 70% of the people actually were out either, and some of them were eating while they were walking. I think we're going to swing back a little bit, because delivery is great when it's subsidized by SoftBank, right? Or Nestle, right? Yeah. Thank you very much, investors, for subsidizing. If delivery is $1 or $2, who cares, right? If delivery is $9, $7, $5, I mean, do you want to do that every day? I mean,
and arguably the reason all these guys have scaled so well is because they've been subsidies.
100%. Yeah, SoftBank has paid for most of our food over the last 3 years, right? I mean, I'm thinking there's a lot of other ones that are doing the same.
So the disruption is a free ticket rather than an actual tech disruption, right? I think, yeah, absolutely. No, I'm the first to say it. I'm the first to say it.
Right? I mean, I'll just spend money. So yeah, I mean, why wouldn't you, order in if it was $1 or $2, right? Why wouldn't you? But when it's $5, $7, or $19, I wrote a big article on LinkedIn. I'm predicting that delivery here will go up to $20. and it's already going up. Uber in September raised their price. They'd call it distance pricing and all this stuff. This is just another way to charge more. But it's what used to cost 7 dirhams now, if I want to order from Motor City, which is 5 minutes away from me, it's 11 dirhams for delivery, right? Yeah. So this is just going to carry on. I mean, the price of delivery is going to go up, and restaurants in the U.S. are allowed to have different pricing online than they are in their own restaurants. Versus here they try and tell you can't, although everybody's doing it. But the price of the consumer, it's going to become painful to the point where customers are going to it's going to change their behavior.
And if we look forward, right? So at the end of the day, what we're seeing is that sustainability is really coming into question, as in terms of sustainability of business models, but also sustainability of what's good for us, right? What's good for consumers, what's good for the planet, et cetera, right? So Steve and I are big kind of advocates of the roles of brands, right? So sure, I believe in my government, whether it's in Canada or the UAE, and sure, I believe in kind of the law and government and regulation and stuff like that. But I inherently, at the end of the day, really believe that brands can sway populations way more than and have way more impact in narratives and what's right and what's wrong even than pretty much anyone else, right? So what do you think the role of brands are moving forward? I mean, look at what happened with COVID, and because I don't think brands understand their responsibility, right? I think you get it, but.
So we started our environmental journey. We've always been, pretty sort of thoughtful about it. I don't want to hang us out as a green company. We're on an environmental journey, right? Yeah. We just want to be a better company overall, and we can make a big impact in the environment, in the way we behave. And so our environmental journey started after I realized that I figured everybody had a drawer full of straws and plastic cutlery that we were putting out. And I calculated that one year we'd put out, like 500,000 or 600,000, plastic straws and cutlery, which were probably sitting in drawers because I had a drawer full of it too.
I did too.
And so it occurred to me, well, let's just stop that, right? And everyone's like, well, you can't, you have to do that. I'm like, well, why? And so I actually, I looked online and I came across a program in California from an NGO called Lonely Whale Foundation that was actually, it's set up by Adrian Grenier, the guy from Entourage, the actor, right? Yeah. So I love the campaign, and they chose the straw because it's an easy place everybody can start to have a conversation. We can all make that change in our lives. It's easier, right? Yeah. So I love the campaign. So we did a whole campaign around it. And we cut it out completely. We had huge, all of our customers loved it, and other people who weren't our customers loved it. We then challenged our industry peers to do it, and we're just this little company, right? But 55 companies followed suit because they saw how happy everybody was about it, right? So I think it was funny because people are like, oh, they're not going to like it. I'm like, well, what's it like? It's plastic that's sitting in a drawer, right? It's garbage, basically, right? And so that was an easy change for us. But imagine, now it'd be millions of pieces of cutlery and stuff that we're no longer using. Our Wildflower brand is all of our packaging is PLA, which is a cane-based. It looks like plastic, but if you put it in the oven at 40 degrees Celsius, it'll melt, right? Because it's biodegradable, it's organic. Everything that we do for Wildflower, it's all it's not only biodegradable, but it's compostable. So the things that we're doing, we're working on an electric delivery fleet, right? Because the cost gap is just there now. The technology is where it needs to be. And so we're just trying to figure out that cost gap, and we're working with the government and other entities on that. Sure. We're right now, even our petrol-based engines, we're working with a company that have an additive, and we're testing that right now. That'll increase the range of our bikes by 30%, and we're just testing that now. Again, it's a small thing. It's a very inexpensive additive, but if we can do that, and then if, let's say, everybody else did that, that's a big impact, right? So it's not just about what your company can do. It's about what can you inspire others to do. If you can demonstrate it and it's effective and people like it, then others will follow, right? And that's so we have a very strong. We have a strong responsibility to use what we're doing, and to do better. And it's not only it's better for our environment, it's better for our customers. We feel good about what we do, right? Better about how we conduct ourselves, and economically, you said earlier that it's about shareholder value and creating shareholder value. But for me, I'm the only shareholder, but creating shareholder value for me is about this is creating shareholder value because we're creating deeper ties with our customers, right? We're creating more inherent value in the brand, which isn't cash. It's not money, on the bottom line directly, but it's a brand and value creator that, I believe will pay dividends one day. That's not why I do it. I do it because it just makes sense, right? It's the thoughtful thing to do, and it doesn't cost us very much money to do most of these things.
Awesome.